From the Emmy-nominated Erie Veterans Series, Part 2 of Vietnam Common Bonds. The true stories of the men and women in our community who faithfully served our country during the Vietnam conflict. Vietnam Common Bonds. Proudly brought to you by John V. Schultz, Furniture and Mattress. And now, Part 2 of Vietnam Common Bonds.
I turned 19. I just decided one day that it was time to go. So I got up next morning, went into the federal building, and I tried to get in the Marines for 2 years. I'd heard that they were taking 2-year hitches, so I asked to go for 2 years. They said, well, you got to give us 3 years. I said, well, thank you very much. So I walked across the hallway to the Army. They said, we'll take you tomorrow. I said, well, I probably should let my parents know. I said, can you have 2 weeks? They said, yeah, 2 weeks. He said, we would have got you in about 6 or 8 months anyways, they said. So that was it. 2 weeks later, off I went at 19 years of age to Fort Dix Basic, and then 9 weeks in Louisiana on jungle training. Then I went straight to Vietnam from there.
A friend who graduated from my same nursing school, who was one of the first male nurses from Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, and he called me up and he said, do you feel like volunteering to go to Vietnam? And I said, well, I don't know, I need to think about it. And I think I thought about it for 2 days, and I was 23 when I went in, so I was older than many veterans. But I volunteered, and when I went to the Army recruiter, I said, I'm interested in volunteering for Vietnam, and he said, come right in and sit down. That was that. 6 weeks later, I was in Fort Sam Houston because I was a nurse, I was fortunate to be an officer, and I was there 6 weeks, and then 6 weeks later.
What years were those, Charlotte?
70 to 71. Yeah, after you had that really tough time during Tet and following.
Right.
You made it safe for us.
When the Tet, I had a college deferment and graduated from Penn State in 1967, and Uncle Sam was waiting at the door, right? So it didn't take long to get on the road. But like you, I was 24, so I actually was a grandpa.
Yeah.
Because most of the people
were 17, 18, 19, maybe. That was.
And that was a wild ride. I was trained jungle warfare, and where do I end up? Street fighting in the city of LA. But you do what you have to do. So.
The year was 1965. I flunked out of college. There was a war and a draft, and was interested in going into the funeral business after I got out of the service, so I wanted something that was medical. Not realizing that the Marine Corps got their corpsman from the Navy. Being extremely naive at 20 years old, thought that if I went to Vietnam it would be aboard a hospital ship. Didn't work out that way. But as I look back on it, almost 2 years of my 4-year enlistment was spent with the Marine Corps, and I would not trade a day of it.
To be honest, I was not involved in what the political climate in the country was. I knew it was hostile. I knew people didn't want us there. I knew that it was a very contentious time in our country. I had a skill, knowledge, information that I didn't feel there was any reason why I shouldn't go. So it was the best and worst experience in my life. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm grateful for that experience. I learned a great deal, and it's helped to shape the person I am today. How about for you?
I was like you, Charlotte. I was not. I had no political giving there. I was born rural. My parents were a product of the Depression. Very patriotic, and so was I. Draft dodging was not an option. I didn't know what to expect, as most of them did, but there was no question about going and serving my duty.
As I recall, a lot of the discussion or the from our government was to prevent the expansion of communism and the domino effect in Southeast Asia. And I guess I will leave my comment at that. I bought into it at the time. That's it.
Well, I'd have to say I echo some of the same sentiments that's been mentioned here. I was brought up to love our country, and I felt that there was, crazy as it may sound, that I was no better than anybody else, that I should go. As a young American, I had no intentions of ever dodging it or getting out of it. Like I said, going to another country or dodging a draft was never an option. I never considered it, and I felt it was my duty as a young man to go. And knowing that if you're going to go as a draftee, there's a good chance you're going to be an infantry. But you know what? That's the gamble I took, and fortunately for me, it worked out.
You can be trained forever, and you're not prepared for it. To be faced with a life and death situation at a moment's notice, to be an 18 to a 25-year-old corpsman or medic, where you are put in a position where you play God. The things I saw corpsmen do, that I saw fellow Marines do, they did everything in their power to get that wounded soldier, Marine, airman, sailor out of the field and on a chopper, medevaced out, and turn around and go back and do it all over again. You are not prepared. You have been trained but you just don't know until you experience it.
I also think that it's not just whatever the job was that you had to do, whether you were infantry or medical or, such as yourself, Steve, but you had to worry about your own life. Like, were you going to survive it, or how are you going to get through it? I mean, I had my own fear and apprehension, like, will I ever get out of here? I can remember when we were on red alert and the Marines came through the hospital passing out flak jackets and helmets. And I said, what am I supposed to do with this? He said, put it on. And if people start invading the hospital, put your patients under the bed. And I was like, what's that going to do? I couldn't work in that helmet and flak jacket because it was too heavy and it slowed me down, so I didn't wear it. And I really didn't think of my own life. I was focused on my patients and doing everything humanly possible and then some to stabilize them, provide care. Because we were in a VAC hospital, we did surgery, we had treatments, IVs, medications. It was overwhelming because it was every day, 12 to 14 hours a day. And if there were no replacements, you didn't get days off. So it was grueling, it was overwhelming. But the camaraderie, the closeness of the people that you worked with, that's what got you through, really. I'm very grateful for each of you and each of the people that I served with.
Well, that's basically, yeah. I was over there, and of course, as I said, I was infantry, and it didn't take too long, too many operations, too many days in the bush to find out that, or to realize, I guess, that this is about us taking care of each other and getting each other home. I'm not too sure this is about winning the big picture here. You know, this is about making sure that we stay close together, we protect each other, things like that. You know, the bullets start flying, everything else is out the door. And the survival part of it was more of the, you know, of course in their jungle training, they try to dehumanize you, you know, they do all these strange things to you. And I always used to think in training, you know, you sang crazy songs about killing at nighttime and all this crazy stuff, and I'm thinking, who does this kind of stuff, you know? I mean, who thinks this?
Yeah.
But I got over there, and when the bullets started flying, you respond, you're trained to respond, you do what you have to. The amazing part of this whole thing, and you know, I was a rifleman, I was a machine gunner, and I used them, and I wasn't even mad at them. But it was the job. It was the job, and I did it to survive as everybody else, and we took care of each other.
I think that that's true of you. You can never prepare for it. The American serviceman is an amazingly resilient person, and you experience things that you just couldn't ever imagine in your entire life, and you accept them. And the war is so all-encompassing, and it's been mentioned here twice that the camaraderie is unbelievable. Your buddy next to you, his well-being becomes more important than your own is. You're with these people 24 hours a day, war environment 24 hours a day. Emotions play a big role. Adrenaline is running, and you know more about these people than even their own parents and wives.
Family.
The emotional bond between the people is something that could never be described or replaced.
You talk about your dreams, your aspirations, the things that you want to do when you get home. You laugh together, you cry together, and you just hope that your dreams come true. But it's a very, well, as they say, there is a very strong bond between us, but there is a bond that will never be broken between a corpsman who has served in combat with Marines. And I see that quite often with other corpsmen in Erie who belong to a couple of organizations that I do, that bond is still there and still very strong.
Part 2 of Vietnam, Common Bonds, will return in a moment. We now return to Part 2 of Vietnam, Common Bonds.
The North Vietnamese had hit a orphanage, and there were a couple hundred children, from babies, infants, to teenagers, that came through the hospital, 95th Evac, within about 20 some hours, and no matter how sad you felt that you lost a baby or a 10-year-old or whomever, you still had to keep going. And you had to develop a way of just coping to just shut down your emotions in order to be able to function. And I think I learned there very well to not to allow my feelings to play into anything, because there wasn't time. It was just,
Boy, that's an excellent point too, Charlotte. Yep, you learn that.
and
you
if
have
you
this
lost somebody,
invisible barrier.
yes, yes.
And I'll be honest, I still have that barrier
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. I can only let people get but so close, because I'm afraid they're going to
'Cause you're
leave.
protecting yourself.
Yeah.
With me, it's just a matter of trying to understand the whole scope of the war, and we as Americans and stuff there. But you know, it just when I came back, I didn't go to the VA. I mean, I just, you know, I had those nightmares for 20 years or so. I would just screaming nightmares at night. I wake up just screaming, and excuse me, and I didn't know you're supposed to do anything about it other than accept it. You know, I really didn't think. I thought, well, I just got to suck this up and move on, and I did for a long time until I started getting together with some of my band of brothers over there that I was with, and finding out that they're getting taken care of, and the VA and stuff like that. So I guess that's kind of when I started to get involved in it. But I just thought, well, hey, this is maybe the way it goes, and you're just gonna move on, and
It's just normal.
and just normal. And anyhow, but the VA here is wonderful as far as I'm concerned.
Initially, we had some type of a disadvantage because what we were going through was an unknown entity, and of course, when you come back from that situation, you're macho and you don't want to admit the weakness, and there was a stigma too with the mental issues we went through. So, by and large, we avoided a lot of that for decades.
I think too, the other thing in Vietnam is, okay, there were the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese, but you couldn't tell the difference, is my understanding from the soldiers in the field. And so you didn't know who you could trust at all. And even children would come with a loaf of bread. Gee, I want a loaf of bread, and there'd be,
Grenade in it.
yeah,
Tried
grenades.
throwing a grenade out,
Yeah. It was just so different, I think, and you
The
just had
war
to
was
trust your
around you,
Yeah,
and there wasn't a line of demarcation.
right, not like World
It
War
was
I
front
and
back
II.
and each
Yeah,
side, 24
Right.
hours a day.
And you said it. It consumed you.
yes,
It
You were
consumed
totally consumed.
every bit of your life.
Yeah.
Everything you did was
Right.
about the war. It just engulfed you, and you just had to embrace it the best you could to survive.
There was no tomorrow. Tomorrow was a replica of today.
Tomorrow
again-
was future.
Vietnam was the first war to be televised. And in doing so, because of our form of government, it brought out those who were for and against. You can't say that they're not patriots because they're pacifists or because they were not in favor of the war, but it put all of us in a very uncomfortable position, in that our belief was that we were doing the right thing, and I'm sure that many of them felt that they also were doing the right thing. But as time has passed, and I begin to read more and more of the history of the war, who was right and who was wrong,
It's kind of immaterial. at this point.
yeah.
and I think too, for all of us, you volunteered, and we all did what we thought was best at the time. And now with the history and other information, it's like Monday morning quarterbacking. We have more information. I didn't know that they were fudging the body counts and all of that when I was there, but when I got home and found out. And when I came home and Nixon was in the middle of Watergate, I was like, are you kidding me? I went to a war and he's doing this. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, because they don't tell you everything.
No.
And you can't rely on what they do tell you that that's accurate. So.
History and the media, they don't record the emotions that we're going through on an hourly basis, the yo-yo. That's part of the equation that's missing.
Well, but I think too, we learn not to express our emotions. And because Vietnam was televised and subsequent conflicts have been, I believe we need the media in order to have checks and balances so that we know what's going on in the government, so we stay as a democracy and don't end up as a dictatorship.
Our job when I first was over there was, I think it was to search and destroy. I think that's what our missions were called, and that became kind of nasty, those terms. So it went to kind of like sweep and clear. I think we ended up. We did the same thing. We searched, we patrolled, we hacked the jungle. You know, operations 10 days, 15 days. We got resupplied through the jungle every 3 days. We lived in the jungle. Our mission was just to find them, to find the enemy. Some general was sitting with pins on a map of some big picture, you know, saying that, hey, that platoon should be there, they should be making contact and stuff like that. I don't know. I just, you know, when I was a squad leader, I had a group of guys to take care of, keep them alive, and you know, we did when we made contact. Anybody that's not scared is crazy, you know. But what you're trained to do, and you want to survive it. With us, you were dehumanized, so you didn't. You did what you had to do. I mean, and it was really fairly easy to pull the trigger. That was never an issue. When we were on platoon operation, my squad was halfway up a hill, 50 yards, stopped having lunch. I was at the bottom of the hill, and just as an observation post, make sure nobody come up behind us. Well, wouldn't you know it, the other squad of the platoon goes out on a patrol up over a hill, and they run into an ambush. Okay, the Viet Cong ambush. So everything's hitting the fan. All of a sudden, there's a little lull. Well, unbeknownst to everybody else, but me, is all the enemy ran down this hill, and they're running through the jungle right straight at me. I could hear them coming, and I was by myself. And I looked up for help. Of course, everybody's looking the other way, and so the only thing I knew the only way I was going to survive it is if I couldn't yell for help. I had to stay there, and I had to get ready to try to, I guess, kill them all when they came through. And there was about 5 or 6 of them running straight at me, and it was thick jungle. There was one little clearing. Unfortunately, the first one that came in. And I was scared, but I thought, you know, I got to survive. I mean, it's the human instinct of survival. So unfortunately, the fastest one, you know, came through, and I took him out. And so when I took him out, the other ones ran straight away from me. And again, not a big deal. This one I shot, we went after. He crawled off, we captured him. I got some kind of a medal for capturing a prisoner who died anyways. He was all shot up. But irregardless, that's the way the Army does things. And that's just one incident that you go through. And it's just all about, you know, my brothers, we survived that deal, believe it or not. With the rounds flying everywhere, but that's the way it is at times, you know.
Yeah, there are times that you would go for extended periods of time and not see the enemy, but you still took casualties, mainly from booby traps, and then somebody got medevaced out. But one of the funny stories, talking about body counts, had a young lieutenant. We came upon a fresh grave, and he wanted to find out what this person had died from. So he told the Marines to dig up the grave. And it got to a point where it got pretty stinky. and the Marines couldn't do it anymore. So the lieutenant yelled over to me, "Hey Doc, come over here and finish this, will you?" So we did, and it was lunchtime. So I went over, sat down next to some Marines to eat my lunch, and everybody got up and left. I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Doc, you stink. We're not going to stick around here."
That's funny.
I don't have too many times that I really come to mind of the good ones. There was some sense of reward. When we moved south, we went to interdiction, and the purpose of that was to delay or prevent a 1969 offensive. And so we found the Sturgis Jungle Highway and the Jolly Trail, and things really got really dicey because North Vietnamese were pushing hard to get in December to get troops in place. And I think the rewarding thing was that the consequence was the 1969 Tet Offensive never came to be. So, there's some sense of reward in that because I played a real small, insignificant role probably in that.
Insignificant?
The big picture.
Well, I like to think that because the Tet Offensive never happened, that there were especially a lot of children that escaped harm's way.
Yeah.
Because the Vietnamese, they knew to hurt was to go after the children,
Yes.
the young people.
Yeah.
And I might as well say it, the American GI is a sucker for children, no matter what color, race, or where they're from. A total
Wow.
sucker, and so they used that. They used the children.
They did.
And so that was a big part of the reward. That never came to pass.
Thank you for
Because
making
I
the
was
same.
in the first one, and so it meant more.
I had two things happen. They had Vietnamese women on our hospital compound who did the laundry because, we had to be clean because of contamination issues and what have you. So I got called into the orderly room one day, and I was told that the Mama San that was doing my laundry, washing my clothes, that she was NVA. She was
A
What's it?
plant.
yeah. And then I understood why my money was disappearing and my bras. And I kept writing home saying to my mom, "Can you please send me some bras?" And she says, "What are you doing with your underwear?"
There's a
She
shortage in
was
this.
taking my bras, for goodness sakes. And the idea that she was that close to me, she was in where I lived, and I feel very guilty that I lived in a BOQ. I mean, I had a sheet for a ceiling, and there was some kind of nests up there. I don't know what they were, and I don't want to know. But I do feel guilty about that because I know you guys had a really tough time in those foxholes. But when I found out she was that close and she was taking my money and my underwear, that was too much. And the funny thing and the tender thing that happened is during one of the mass casualties, there was a child apparently I must have helped to save and what have you. And the father came to the receiving area, and because I would wear the Vietnamese rank on my fatigues, and he's looking for Da Huy, which was Vietnamese for captain. He had his other child that he wanted to give me in thanks for saving his other son.
Wow.
And I think he wanted me to be able to take him back, bring him back to the United States for a better life. Well, we had a LPN who was Vietnamese, and she was our interpreter. But there were so many dialects in Vietnam, and she was having a hard time. He was in Narvin, and she was having a hard time trying to find a way to explain that I can't take a kid home with me. So, but that was a tender moment, and I just tried to explain, thank you, but I can't do that, you know.
There was a lot of booby traps, Chi-Con grenades, a lot of homemade stuff. But a lot of guys. I was fortunate enough to be with a group of guys that very few were killed, but I'm probably one of the few out of the that did not even get wounded. I had one small piece of shrapnel, but I just pulled it out and threw it away. But a lot of guys had shrapnel, but it's from Chi-Con grenades. You know, the tripwires, it's impossible to see them all. Fortunately for me, a couple times we're setting up. My squad leader walks, takes a few steps from me, trips one off, Chi-Con grenade, hit him hard. I go and run over to him to get his gear off, to try to get a medic over there. I step over one that I missed the tripwire. The medic come over, caught it right behind me, and he blew part of his foot off right behind me. So the whole area was just, they knew we were coming in that area, and the Viet Cong just peppered the whole area, and we had 5 or 6 guys down within a matter of seconds and 2 medics down. So when we moved up into a thicker jungle area and patrolled, we had less booby traps, more firefights, contact with them. But prior to that, in the Mekong Delta, those dikes were just booby trapped horribly.
We were up in I-Corps, and the Tet Offensive, they booby trapped heavily to slow us down on their retreat, and it was an issue. When we went down to 3 Corps next to Cambodia, they hadn't had the time to set facilities, but they still had punji pits and unexploded artillery and other improvised ones. I was fortunate to have the world's greatest point man, and down there the Vietnamese always, by twisting branches and making it might be a little bouquet, somebody really sharp to say, that doesn't belong in this jungle. And he knew those. And we had absolutely no trouble, and I had to chuckle because he'd let the company pass, and then he would change the Vietnamese signals on the pushes. Mm-hmm. And several times we went on our way, and back behind us we heard this hellacious boom. They had set off their own booby trap. Mm-hmm. That's how good that guy was. It never got hit. Never got hit.
They were there, and it was on an ongoing basis. You just never knew. You would go down a trail, and somebody might hit a tripwire or something, or you would step on a mine that was buried. They did whatever they could to injure, kill, or maim as many Americans or Australians or Koreans or whoever that they could.
You could never relax for 2 seconds because of stuff like that. High alert 24 hours a day.
Yeah, you'd walk, you'd move, you'd walk, and you would just, you're just waiting. You're waiting for the cac, you're waiting for the machine guns to open up, or waiting for the explosion.
Yeah.
Because it was that way every day.
Yeah. And another thing that didn't help much is what you were walking on was your bed. Mm-hmm. Whether it was a swamp, a rock mine, or it didn't matter. That was your bed.
That was his bed,
right under your feet.
Part 2 of Vietnam, Common Bonds, will return in a moment. We now return to Part 2 of Vietnam, Common Bonds.
As crazy as this sounds, I found myself, because you get so attached to these guys, that I didn't take an R&R for 10 months. I humped the bush for 10 solid months because I did not want to be there, being on R, as crazy as it sounds, when they got into trouble. makes no sense, but I stayed there. I stayed, but I got to tell you, after 10 months of laying in the jungle, of being bit in the face by spiders, termites, scorpions, snakes. Every night they come in, crawl under your poncho. I wake up in the morning and I'm sleeping on snakes all the time. It kind of was getting to me after a while.
There were
About 10
two
months.
fire ants there, Alan.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah, them ants. But that wears on you after a while. And at 10 months, and I just said, "Is there an R&R? I don't care where it's at." And they found me one, so I took a little break. And the irony of it is, you go to somewhere, another country, for 6 days, and it's peaceful, and you can relax, at least best you can. And you come back to Vietnam, you're on a chopper, you get resupplied, you move 20 minutes, and you're in a firefight, and your point man shot through the chest and down. And I'm thinking, this is crazy, but that's just the way it was.
I relate to that because when I was gone, I was in the hospital for a little bit. I didn't worry about me. I worried about the people I left behind.
Yeah.
And then when we would have casualties, and even to this day, I think, if I'd have done this, if I would have done that, or I would have prevented it, the outcome would have been different. So we transfer the guilt onto ourselves.
From a medical point of view, if a patient passed, you go through your brain thinking, well, if I coulda, shoulda, oughta, I just think that's what goes with the war, that it's not sane, it's not rational.
We mentioned this a little earlier. I'd like to bring it up again because of you and Jim. In our unit, the Air Cavalry, in our casualties, if the medic could stabilize them to the point they could be moved and medevaced to, then when you took over, the survival rate, once stabilized, was about 99%. And that's kudos to you two people.
Well,
For a war, that is amazing statistic.
that's where they learned the crisis intervention, the helicopter trauma centers grew out of the Vietnam War, and helicopters rescuing people here.
Well, the medic's on the line, and you know better than anybody. I mean, when somebody goes down, you call medic.
Yeah.
That medic comes. It doesn't matter what happens, and like the incident I mentioned earlier. I mean, just 2 or 3 steps trying to get over to help somebody, he loses his own foot, blown off, and then the other medic. But they move, and that's their life expectancy was less than the grunt.
Well, I'll tell you that they're on the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. There are 692 Navy corpsmen, and there are 1,404 Army medics, 2,000.
You don't think as a medic could be in the front line assault, but they are.
They are.
Yeah.
Do great work.
I mean, you don't go time
Saved
out.
a lot of people.
Yeah,
Wait till the fire.
the Marines all went for cover and were firing, and then they call for a corpsman up, and he goes out and
Yeah.
I was, wait a minute, they got to rewrite the manual on this one.
Yeah, really.
Something
I
wrong
can
with it.
appreciate that.
Wait a minute.
Surprisingly, it rears its ugly head, and I don't know what the trigger is. I just can't. Some things obviously are triggers that I avoid, and sometimes it just comes up out of the blue.
Steve, you said helicopter sounds. I know when I hear a helicopter overhead, I get sick. I mean, I'm like, okay, I got to go to work there. And it's just like conditioning, I think.
Absolutely.
And
And in your
fireworks.
position, you hear 3 or 4 coming.
Yeah.
They're coming in mass, and you're thinking, oh man.
I was like 40 miles from the DMZ, and so, I was hearing firepower all the time, day and night. And so noise and, sharp sounds. My kids grew up learning, don't walk up behind me and tap me on the shoulder because it's frightening. I mean, and this many years later, 50 years, I still have some issues. I still have that memory burned in my mind about all those children. I was the triage nurse that night, and when you say about playing God, you do have to decide who lives and dies until the physicians get there. And it's not a comfortable feeling. We had a doctor that graduated medical school and must have gotten drafted, but he never did an internship. So he had the book learning and the degree, but
On-the-job training.
yeah, and a GI died. As a nurse, I was not trained in how to do cut downs, where you go into the vein and put the IV directly into the vessel. And this doctor, he panicked and he just shut down. He got a Bible out and started to pray. And I said, Doctor, we need to get a line in this guy because he had lost his legs and one arm and we were limited and he was just losing blood. And that's in my head. I see that a lot. And I feel so bad because I tried to do a cut down, but that was not within the scope of my MOS, so to speak.
The one that stays with me is the last Marine that I put into a body bag to send home to his family. Almost on a daily basis, 50 years ago. That's the one that I will always remember.
It just depends on what I'm doing at the time. So I mean, there's hardly any time goes by, a day goes by that there's not something that I recall, you know. But probably, but what pops up probably more than anything, any time is the we were on operation and got into a firefight. They shut the point man. He's down and he's out there and he's crying and he's calling for help. Yeah, I'm about halfway, you know, in the squad, and you know, I kick my gear off, take my weapons, and I crawl up as close as we can get, and he's out there, and I'm looking around at, you know, everybody. I'm looking around. This kid is crying. He's dying, and he knows he's dying, and he's crying, and I'm thinking, you know, we can't leave him out there. So anyhow, can't leave him out there. So I got up and started running, and I kept waiting to get shot, get mowed down. But fortunately, I got to him, and drug him down in the foxhole. And we took care of business with the bad guys, and he got hit. The round AK-47 round hit his rifle on the top, put 8 small holes in his chest, his lungs and stuff. But anyway, we got him out of there. And you know, I was a seasoned vet. I'd been in the bush 10, 11 months. I mean, you know, and but we got him out of there. They took him to Japan. Never saw him again. And I cannot find out. And I talked to all my buddies. I don't even know the guy's name. Don't even know whatever happened to him. He never came to any of the reunions, and it's kind of an unanswered issue with me. But anyhow, he made it.
Through it all, we came back different people. Mm-hmm. And I think most of them, for the most part, better people. But sometimes I wonder what I would have been like if I hadn't had that experience.
One thing the war taught me is that important things are not things. I don't have every appliance that's out there. I don't need all that stuff. What's important to me is coming together and talking and sharing. And I really feel privileged to be among you today. And I just really see each of you as heroes. You're my heroes. And what you were doing out there made it safe for us to do what we had to do.
Well, Charlotte, that kind of reminds me, I don't know about the hero part, but we went 40 or 45 years with never hearing thank you for your service. In fact, I've heard negative variations of it, but not the positive
Yeah.
one.
That's true. That is true. And that it does feel very comforting when people say that. I feel that we were the pioneers, and it was demonstrated what people should not do, and that's throw things at veterans and call them names and that kind of thing. And I feel that as a result of that, the country changed and realized that they didn't treat us well, and that changed when the hostages came back from Iran, and the country was tying yellow ribbons everywhere. And so it's better now, and that's what's important.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
My father-in-law was career Navy. My wife understands. She would sit at home when I was in Vietnam, and back in 68, 69, at the end of the nightly news, they would run the names of those who were killed in Vietnam. In the years that I was there, I think in 1968, there were 17,000 killed.
It was a rough year.
And there was another 12,000 killed in 1969. And when you break that down to the number of killed average day, what a waste, an absolute waste. So with that, there is some anger. But we get up every morning, we help who we can, we look for the good in people, and hope that we make a difference.
When I came back, it probably was the equivalent of being in the war. I was devastated at the treatment and totally unaware, and I actually thought that maybe the pilot made a mistake and landed in the wrong country. And that did very little to my parents. I came into Oakland and San Francisco, and my first dealings with the civilians, I ended up in the middle of the Simonese Liberation Army. One notable thing when I was home, I don't think any of us ever discussed with our parents what was going on. But the thing that sticks out with me was that my mother wanted me to go to church and to wear my Class 1 uniform, and by that time it had some hardware dangling on it and all. So we went into small rural church on Sunday and sat in, quote, their pew, and some of the people on our side of the church got up and moved to the other side of the church.
Wow.
And I thought,
That's
whoa.
terrible.
Amazing.
And my mother started to just cry, and my mother didn't cry. She was a hard woman, and she started to cry, and it was then that I really got, that was my continuing education there. So I retreated basically from society because I knew I wasn't welcome in my own country.
When I got home, there was very little discussion within the family regarding the experiences in Vietnam. Again, I went along with the domino effect that what we were there for was a good cause. And I served another 5 months, and I got out and had a job and got married and raised a family and kept it within me for good 40 years. And it's only been the last 10 that I've come out and talked about it. And I just remember that when I came home and my father, we walked into the dining room and he reached up on the buffet and he handed me my keys for the house and he said, "I never thought I would give these back to you."
It's a good thing that he was able to do that. Yeah, when I came home, my mother told me, don't talk about it. She said, just don't talk about it, don't think about it. And that's what I did. I thought about it, I couldn't help it. And I know I never had a conversation with my dad about it. I think it was the climate. When I came home, I landed in Seattle, Washington, and the flower children, the hippies, were in the airport, and they were throwing things at us. Apples and oranges, and so you kind of learned you'd better not talk about it or let people know you participated, because it wasn't a pleasant thing.
It was a little different for me because I wasn't coming back to a big city. I came back to a small town of Albion. In the Albion News that they used to have then was some military accommodations that I had received. How they got to that paper, I don't know, but it was in the paper just about a week or so before I had got home. So quite frankly, I think people thought I was something more than what I really was in a small town of Albion. So I didn't really hear anything negative, but was I aware that it was going on everywhere else? Absolutely.
I think I might add too, in that same thing, that when we went and we came back as individuals. Now they come as units. So you're by yourself, you don't know one soul, everybody's a stranger, you don't communicate. So really when you're faced with this really surprisingly difficult circumstances, you don't have your buddy, your battle buddy to help you through the tough time.
It's not like the movies. It's not like TV. It is the unknown. It is what you decided to do as an individual to make life better, whether it be the person next to you, the person that lives across the street, or across the world. But to fight a war to get to that point is a terrible sacrifice that a select few, especially today, a very select few have volunteered to serve our nation throughout the world. And we are deployed throughout the world.
With me, it's I'm proud to be an American. Always have, always will. That's why I went overseas way back when things were always iffy. But and proud to have served with the guys I served with, and I see them, majority of them, every 2 years. We get together somewhere in the United States, and it's just an awesome feeling being amongst them when you know 50 years ago that you shared everything with them.
You were a kid.
Yeah.
And look at us
absolutely.
now.
Absolutely. And so that's my spew on it, my read on it.
It's time that we shared our story, and for the young people, they're going to hate it. They're going to hate every minute of it. They're going to come to realize that there are no winners in war, only losers. So you're putting forth your effort to lose. But one thing I can say for the people, the younger people, they'll come back different. They'll come back changed. And they'll come back with an entirely different perspective on life and the world. And they'll come back better people.
Freedom is not free. Somebody is paying the price. And all wounds are not visible. And just because I know I have felt almost guilty that I have my arms and legs and you know, psychologically I do have some wounds, but the blessing is I've been working on them for a long time and I'm in a better place.
All in all, wouldn't trade it, wouldn't want to do it again. But if I did, it'd be for you, the person next to you. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
We take care of each other, and I've learned a lot from all of you today. It is something that many people need to realize, the sacrifice that our military goes through on a daily basis to keep us free so that some of us can protest, so that some of us can display anger at that protest, but that's okay, because without the protest there will not be any change. I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud of what you all did. I'm proud of the millions of Vietnam era veterans who put it on the line, especially for those today.